This is the Eternal Record Bible, dictated by Yeshua HaMashiac, transcribed by Heaven's 12th General. The Book of 3rd Maccabees. Preface. This book is a testimony of my power to deliver when the enemy plots destruction against my people. Though it bears the name Maccabees, it does not speak of the sons of Matthias, but of another hour of affliction when a king of Egypt, in his rage and pride, sought to blot out Israel from the earth. It reveals how the adversaries set snares, sealed the people in strongholds, and purposed to trample them under beasts. Yet I overturned his counsel and turned the devices of the wicked into shame. Here is shown the weight of prayer, the fasting of a desperate nation, and the covenant mercy that cannot be broken. The rulers of this world plot against my inheritance, but their decrees are as dust when I arise to defend my people. Pharaoh once raged, Haman once schemed, Antiochus once blasphemed, and this king also lifted himself high. Yet all were brought low, for none can stand against the Lord of hosts. 3rd Maccabees was kept as a scroll of remembrance to declare that my people shall never be forsaken. It speaks not only of survival, but of the reversal of judgment, where the destroyer became destroyed, and the oppressed were raised up with joy and gladness. This book is for the last days remnant, to remind them that even when sealed in by walls, surrounded by armies, or marked for death, the prayer of the righteous availeth much, and heaven shall answer with deliverance. Yeshua HaMashiac. Chapter 1. Now when Philopator learned from those who returned that Antiochus had taken some of his possessions, he gave orders to his forces to march with him against Antiochus his general. His forces numbering not a few, he entered Antioch to war against him. But when the Jews heard that Antiochus was coming, they joined themselves unto him with one accord, and prayed God for their enemies and for the prosperity of Antiochus. For they had suffered many wrongs under the hand of Ptolemy and his predecessors. So when Antiochus had engaged in battle, and with the help of the Most High had gained the victory, he determined to depart again into Jerusalem. When he arrived, he offered sacrifices to the Most High, and gave thanks abundantly for the good things that had been done unto him. He feasted there with his friends, and having honored the temple and the priests, he afterwards went into Egypt. But the Jews, being treated harshly by certain men in Alexandria, petitioned the king against them, and he wrote letters to his governors for their relief. However, after a certain time, Ptolemy called together his friends and counselors, and declared to them that he wished to visit the cities of the upper country, and especially Jerusalem. When they had all assented to this counsel, he set out with great pomp and came to Gaza. From there he marched into Jerusalem and was received honorably by the high priest and by the city. He entered the temple of God, offering sacrifices to the Almighty, and gave thanks to the Most High God of Israel for his safe arrival. But when he was desirous to enter into the holy place, they withstood him and said that none of all men might enter in, but only the high priest, who is consecrated to the service. Then he was greatly inflamed with anger and threatened them fiercely, swearing with an oath that he would enter in, though they should all be slain. And when he pressed forward to enter by force, the priests fell down upon their faces and besought the Most High to help them and to keep him from defiling the holy place. Then God, who had given his name to that place, made his power to be known. And the king was smitten with a great trembling, for he was shaken in all his members, and being confounded, he was carried out of the temple like a dead man. Thus God did not suffer him to defile his holy place. After this, he returned in great anger from the temple, and devised mischief against the nation. Therefore he came to Memphis, and called together his friends and counselors, and told them what had happened. And he said that he purposed to bring vengeance upon the nation of the Jews, for they had withstood him and driven him out dishonored. And he commanded that all the Jews should be gathered together and sealed up in a place, that they might afterward be destroyed with the most grievous punishment. So the decree went forth throughout the kingdom, and the Jews were seized with fear and trembling, for their enemies compassed them round about. But they lifted up their voices unto the Most High God, the deliverer of all, beseeching him not to suffer them to perish with such cruelty. Chapter 2. Then the king, being filled with great rage, assembled all his friends and the princes of his realm, and set before them the stubbornness of the Jews, how they alone resisted the commands of kings, and would not consent to the customs of the nations. He spoke of how they despised the honors given to other gods, and would not bow to the glory of his power. Therefore he declared that they were worthy of destruction, that the kingdom might be at peace, and all people serve with one consent. But when he had spoken these words, some of his friends, being malicious, confirmed his counsel, but others, of a more merciful spirit, sought to turn his wrath away. Nevertheless, his anger prevailed, and he gave commandment that the Jews should be gathered into one place and sealed up for destruction. So the decree was published, and there was great lamentation among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and prayer. Then the priests fell down before the altar and besought the Almighty to remember the covenants made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his servants. They cried, O Lord, who alone art King and Almighty. The heavens and the earth are thine. Thou hast made all things by thy word. Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing against thine inheritance, O Lord God Most High? Let them be confounded that trust in idols and boast in their false gods. But show forth thy power, O King of heaven and earth, and deliver thy people by thy mighty hand. Then was there a great mourning throughout all the land, both old men and young, virgins and children, together with women heavy with child. All lifted up their voices to heaven with one consent, that the Lord who beholdeth all things would show mercy upon them. So the Lord heard their cry from his holy dwelling place, and the prayer of his people entered into the throne of his glory. And he purposed to work a great deliverance for his inheritance, that the heathen might know that he alone is God, and there is none beside him. Chapter 3. Then the king issued commandment that all the Jews in every city of his dominion should be bound and brought together into one place, that he might in one day take vengeance on them all. So the decree was published with haste, and heralds were sent forth to every region with letters sealed with the king's signet. And when the Jews heard it, they were sore afraid, for the commandment was sudden and the time short. But they encouraged one another with tears, saying, Let us trust in the God of our fathers, for he will not forsake his inheritance. Then there was gathered together of them men and women, young and old, with their children, a great multitude, and they were driven like sheep into the strongholds appointed for them. The whole land was moved at their crying, for they mourned with one voice, and their enemies rejoiced over them. So they were shut in with walls round about, and the gates were made fast, that none should escape. And the king purposed, after certain days, to bring them forth to be trodden down by elephants, a horrible and cruel death. But while they were thus enclosed, they lifted up their hands toward heaven and prayed with tears. And their cry entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth, who sitteth upon the throne of glory. And he sent comfort into their hearts, that they should not faint, but wait upon his deliverance. For the remembrance of the covenant stood before him, and he would not suffer them to be destroyed utterly. So the king, in his pride, thought to cut off the people of the Lord in one day, but the Lord of heaven had already decreed their deliverance. Chapter 4. Then the king commanded that on the third day the multitudes of the Jews should be brought forth into the great place without the city, that they might be destroyed with elephants. So the word went out, and there was great preparation of beasts and armed men round about. And the people, being led together, lifted up their eyes unto heaven, and cried with a loud voice, saying, O Lord God Most High, thou art righteous and true. Thou rulest over all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou didst deliver our fathers from Egypt, and from Pharaoh who pursued them with a mighty host. Show forth now thy power, and deliver us from the hand of this cruel king. And they fasted with weeping, and girded themselves with sackcloth, both men and women, young and old, and the virgins that were kept apart. Even the very little children stretched forth their hands to heaven, crying unto the Lord of heaven. Then the high priest stood clothed in their garments, and fell down before the altar, and besought him who is merciful to remember the covenants, and not to give his heritage to reproach. And the Lord heard the prayer of his people, and the angel of his presence was sent to strengthen them. But the king, being filled with rage, commanded the beasts to be made ready and brought to the place. And they were drunken with wine, and crowned with garlands, that they might be the more fierce upon the people of God. Then the king with his army sat round about in pride, and he commanded the multitude of the Jews to be brought forth. So they came, bound and in great distress, yet they lifted up their voices unto God with one accord. And when the elephants were brought near, the Lord sent upon the king a spirit of deep sleep, and he was hindered from accomplishing his cruelty. For when the beasts were urged forward, the king himself, being overcome with heaviness, fell into a slumber, and his mind was turned away from the slaughter. Thus the wrath of the tyrant was stayed for that day, and the people gave praise unto the Most High, who alone doeth wonders. And they returned to their place of confinement, rejoicing that the Lord had given them a respite from destruction. Chapter 5. But after the third day, the king, being yet more enraged because his counsel was hindered, called together his friends and said, My purpose shall not fail, neither will I cease until this nation is destroyed. For they alone of all men despise the decrees of kings, and worship one whom they call the Almighty, whom they cannot see. Therefore make ready the elephants again, that they may trample them underfoot, and so shall the whole earth know that the power of the king cannot be resisted. So there was made ready a multitude of elephants, exceeding fearful, and they were made drunken with wine mingled with frankincense, that they might be the more fierce. And when the multitudes of the Jews saw the preparation, they cried yet more unto the Lord, with weeping and fasting, and calling upon the name of the Holy One of Israel. Then the Most High, who sitteth upon the throne of glory, sent 2 of his angels in terrible majesty, who made themselves manifest unto the enemy. They shone with brightness, and their armor was like fire, and they stood on either side of the people. And they filled the camp of the adversaries with fear and trembling, and they made the hearts of the beasts to fail. So the elephants turned back upon those that had urged them forward, and trampled them down in great numbers. And the king's heart was smitten with dread, for he beheld the power of God and the deliverance of his people. Nevertheless, his heart was hardened, and he still sought a way to bring evil upon them. But the priests and the people gave thanks unto the Lord, who had shown his mercy, and sent forth his holy angels for their salvation. Chapter 6. But when the king was yet more enraged by the deliverances of the Lord, he commanded with bitter oaths that the people should be destroyed without delay. Then the multitude of the Jews, being pressed together, lifted up their voices with tears unto heaven, saying, O Lord God, who dwellest in eternity, Most High, Almighty, deliver us for thy name's sake. At that time the priests also stood with their vestments, and fell down before the altar, beseeching him that made all things, to preserve his portion, and not to give his heritage to reproach. Then the King of Kings, who ruleth over the powers of heaven, put into the heart of Ptolemy a spirit of forgetfulness and gentleness, so that his mind was turned from fury to pity. For he looked upon the multitude of the people, who were bound for destruction, and he saw their wives and children together with their aged, and he marveled at their patience and steadfastness. And his heart was softened, and he wept, and he gave commandment that they should no more be slain, nor hurt in any wise. Moreover, he commanded that they should be honored with gifts, and be loosed from their bonds, and restored every man to his own house. And he wrote letters throughout his kingdom, declaring the greatness of the God of Israel, who had delivered his people from death. He confessed openly that the counsels which he had devised against them were vain and foolish, for their God had fought for them. So the Jews kept a feast of joy and gladness, because the Lord had turned their mourning into rejoicing and their bondage into liberty. They ordained, moreover, that this day of deliverance should be kept in their generations with gladness and feasting and with praises unto the Most High. Thus God, who is mighty to save, showed forth his power in Egypt, even as he did in the days of Pharaoh, and he magnified his name in the sight of all nations. And the people gave thanks continually, saying, Blessed be the Lord God of our fathers, who hath not forsaken them that trust in him, and who hath broken the counsels of the proud. Chapter 7. So the king returned with joy, and he made a great feast for all his friends and his nobles, giving thanks for the deliverance of the Jews, whom he had purposed to destroy. And he sent for them, and feasted them also, showing them honor. And he commanded that they should be numbered among his friends. Moreover, he wrote letters into every province of his kingdom, declaring openly that the Jews were to be held in honor, and that none should trouble them in anything. And he testified that they were the servants of the Most High God, who had delivered them mightily from destruction. Then were their enemies put to shame, and many of them perished who had sought their hurt. But the Jews had rest and prosperity. And they adorned their temple with gifts and with vessels of gold and silver, and sang psalms of thanksgiving continually. They kept also a feast of deliverance from year to year with gladness, remembering how the Lord had turned their mourning into joy. So they multiplied in the land, and were in safety under the hand of the Lord their God. And the name of the Lord was magnified in every place. For all men said, Great is the God of Israel, who hath delivered his people. Thus ended the troubles of the Jews under Ptolemy, and the book was written for a memorial in all generations, that the people might never forget the mercy of their God.